So judging are Filip Dobranic from Slovenia, Steve Yano from the US, Lila Koenig from Holland, Anna Gurau from Moldova, and Gina Iberi-Shea from the US. Thank you. And with that, I give the microphone and all of my duties to Filip Dobranic. Is everybody okay? Good. No legs broken. Brilliant. To commence the debate.
Welcome everyone to the Budapest Open 2013 Grand Final. Please welcome in opening government Vermont SW, Rebecca White and Serena Selig. In opening opposition, the fiscal cliff divers, Leo Kaufmann and Fabian Farkas. In closing government, also from Vermont, Mariel Golden and Drew Adamczyk. And in closing opposition from Birmingham, Jamie Batchelor and Stephen Gaywood. Before we begin this debate, I would like to remind everyone to pay attention to the echo in this building. So if a lot of you are going to be talking, it is going to be very hard for us to understand what the speakers are saying. So please keep that in mind. And if we're all ready, the motion in front of the House is that this House believes that a European Union institution should block websites in EU member states that use negative racial, ethnic, or religious stereotypes. And I would like to invite the Prime Minister, Serena Selig, to present the case that stands in her name. Hear, hear.
I'm not that tall.
We see today that in the EU, race is a particular problem, and it is exacerbated by the internet, which is being abused by individuals who see it not as a tool of free speech, but as one that they can use to ignite tensions between individuals. They see it not as a way to communicate information, but to excite individuals to violence and to make a majority of the citizens, or a minority of the individuals in the EU feel like their rights no longer matter. So what we're saying on side government today is that we would create an EU institution that would be monitoring the web. We would say that people can report to this institution and it will be reviewed what they have reported to them. We say that what will happen is that these individuals as part of this institution will also monitor these websites in the EU member states. And if we say that if there is a site that is found to have negative ethnic, religious, or racial stereotypes on it, it will then be blocked in the way in which we heard in the information slide that was read before this round. And so that is what we say. And when we say by racial stereotypes and negative ones, we say that ones that are directly linked to one's race, one's religion, one's sexual identity, we think could also be included in here, and one ethnicity. So, what I'm going to talk to you about today, I'll take your clarification after I explain my points, is first off, how the government has a right to block these users' access to the internet, and secondly, how the government has an obligation not to institutionalize racism by allowing it to exist in this way. Clarification?
Yeah. What do you mean by negative?
By negative, we mean that you're portraying this individual in some way that looks down upon them, portrays them as not human, portrays them as someone who doesn't deserve to be part of the European Union. We think that we are fine in entrusting this with an institution who is able to evaluate these things and then is able to block on an as-needed basis. So first off, why does the government have a right to block user access to these and also to block these individuals' rights to create these websites spreading these negative stereotypes? Well, we say first off, the government government makes it possible for the internet to actually function and for these companies to actually use this. Why is this so? Because it provides the stability of a society in which these internets can form companies. It provides contracts which will be enforced by the legal mechanisms of the government under which these companies are creating and using this internet. And we say that because the government creates the situation in which these individuals benefit in this way, we say that it also has a right to regulate and step in when these individuals are abusing the situation and causing harm to their citizens, who they also have a more direct responsibility to. So we say in particular in this instance, the government has the right to protect individuals from harassment and has the responsibility to protect the most vulnerable individuals in society. And we see that those most vulnerable individuals are the ones who are most at risk of not being represented in the EU. We see that those are the ones who are most likely to get disenfranchised because they are being discriminated against due to this immutable characteristic, whether that is their religion, whether that is their race, or a particular ethnicity that they come from. These individuals are particularly vulnerable, so the government has even more of a responsibility to them because of this, because they are this minority, because they are having trouble with enfranchisement. And we say that what happens is that these ones are most at risk at losing their rights, at not being able to participate in the systems of government in which the EU bases itself through its members. And we say that they need particular protection in this way because of this unequal playing field in which they find themselves in which they are unable to get a job in everyday life because perhaps they are Jewish and they have seen, and their employer has seen stereotypes of Jews being able to steal money or thinking that that is an immutable characteristic of them. We see this when we have immigrants from the Arab world, in France, the Muslim community, in which women are portrayed as not being able, as not equal as men, as being forced into positions where they have to wear things like hijabs, and we say that they are also portrayed as individuals who are terrorists, and this is really damaging to them if they are going to integrate into the European Union community, if they're going to actually get jobs, if they'll be able to put food on the plates of their children. These are all things that are very damaging to these individuals who are already at a greater risk because they are in a minority of this population. So the next thing that we say is the government has an obligation to not institutionalize racism. And what do we mean by that? Well, we see that if the government allows this, or the EU in this instance, allows this to exist in the society of the EU as a whole, it's going to be complicit in racism. It's going to be legitimizing these individuals who are using this internet in this way and saying that we're not going to tell you it's wrong. We think it's perfectly fine if you put this out in society, and if people use this and benefit from this information, which these individuals promoting this are going to say that it is. We say that this goes implicitly against the EU's goals of integration and of trying to achieve peace between its member states, because they are going to be acknowledging that this is a legitimate point, that it deserves to exist in society, and what's going to happen is it will be perpetuated in society because of the unique nature of the internet. So why particularly the internet do we need to target in this case? Well, we say it's because the internet, first off, has a wide-reaching audience. It can reach a lot of individuals in their homes and in libraries. We say that because of that, it needs to be uniquely monitored. We secondly say that the second problem is anonymity. We see what happens is that you are able to be racist, you are able to perpetuate these stereotypes about individuals without any check on yourself, which means you're more likely to put radical points out, which you may not say if you are face to face with a Muslim individual or someone of Jewish heritage. We say that that's really important to have a check on because this often blows up, as I'll describe to you in my next example, but I'll take back half before I do.
It's not the only way censorship is not the only way to create a message that something is bad. Like, there really are better ways of doing that.
But what we're saying is that by not censoring these, we're perpetuating it because of the wide audience, because of the anonymity that is on the internet. We're saying it's going to reach these individuals, and that's why the internet has specific harms which we have to censor, and why the EU has an obligation to its citizens in its member states to do so. We say that an example of something where we have seen things clearly blow up is when an American Jewish individual produced the Innocence of Muslim video. We see what happened is a lot of Muslim individuals in the Arab world then use that as an excuse to do things like kill the Libyan US ambassador. And we see that that is not the sort of situation that we want to perpetuate in society because of the anonymity. It means that these individuals do not feel responsible for their actions, and we must check them, or else it will result in disaster, as we have seen happen. We think particularly in the EU, this is also really important to keep a check on because of the racial tensions in the many countries which come together and have many diverse backgrounds backgrounds, which oftentimes have complex ethnic conflicts, as we heard from the speaker who spoke before this debate. We said that the best way to integrate individuals, to make the most people feel enfranchised within the EU, is to make sure that their rights are protected and that they are not being discriminated against. We cannot have this anonymity increase the hate that we see in the European Union. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for her fine speech, and before I invite the leader of opposition, I would like to advise you to keep your microphone closer. It is going to work much better and it's going to be easier for us to hear you. So without further ado, the leader of opposition, Fabian Farkas.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, 3 main points of rebuttal before I get into my constructive, which is firstly about why actually any kind of policy that we are engaging with won't actually work because there is always a way around it. Secondly, what we are actually talking about when we are talking about negative things. And thirdly, here's my third point about who is actually the ones who are able to decide on where we draw this line on what is negative and what is not. The 3 points of rebuttal. Firstly, what we are hearing is that the internet has so much potential and it can reach a lot of people. I emphasize the word can because this is what we actually say. What are we looking at here? We are looking here at some minority sites that have very small influence. We're looking here at some sites that have a small readership, a small circle. Now, what we are asking is, where do most people actually get their stereotypes from? And we contest that this is actually the internet, that this is actually these kind of fringe sites. What we are saying is that most of these stereotypes, where do they develop? They develop at home, they develop in your surrounding, they develop in the environment you grow up with. And the internet is only a very, very small part of this kind of life that you are living with, and the internet isn't really the kind of forum you go to actually expand your horizon. We think it is more this kind of place where it could reach a lot of people, but usually it only does reach a selective amount of people. Now, the one claim they give here, or the one proof they give here, is this great video in a sense of danger, actually. No, in a sense of whatever the name of that video was. So 2 things with this. Firstly, it is a video, so it isn't like a thing on the internet, but it wasn't a video. Secondly, it wasn't even seen by 99% of the people who got enraged by it. So we have a serious discrepancy between what is actually happening on the internet, what is actually happening in society. And the claim that you want to start censoring the internet just because there are some people who no, it is actually true, because there are some harms that are happening in general society, we don't see how this is good. Thirdly, you are saying that actually we are giving the people a possibility, those people who are actually spreading negative stereotypes, we are giving them a possibility for some kind of feedback loop by actually banning their homepages and by, well, pretty much taking down their opinions. We are saying that actually this is the worst kind of feedback loop because the only feedback they are receiving is that they now suddenly hear, okay, look at this, my post has gone, so I'm just posting it somewhere else. We actually think that the best kind of feedback is direct engagement and not just this kind of trying to solve the problem, to solve parts of the problem. We would like to tackle it at the roots. Opening.
So you're saying direct engagement would be the best way, but you also admit that these are fringe sites in which no one is going to engage with these individuals who will think their ideas are legitimate.
Well, awesome. Then just decide for yourself. Is it a major problem where everyone is actually having problems with and we need to engage with? Then it should happen on major sites and we should see a lot of engagement. Or is it actually happening really on fringe sites? Then there is no reaction in society. We see a discrepancy here on your side, actually. First thing, it won't work, and I will just have it briefly to have it done once. Any kind of blocking of IPs is kind of difficult because firstly, who are the ones looking at the home pages? Either these are the viewers that have already these kind of views entrenched and just want to express them somewhere. So if they get taken down, they actually have the possibility to place it somewhere else. The second one is this kind of like accidental visitor, let's say it like this, or the kind of like researcher, the kind of person who is trying to find different sides of argument, different sides of the argument in his research, in his looking. So what we are seeing here is that the thing you are doing is, with focusing on these hardcore users that can always go somewhere else, you are actually limiting the possibilities. You are limiting the freedoms of these people that are actually not encased by these negative stereotypes. What does it lead to? The hardcore viewers actually and the hardcore commenters actually have a stronger possibility to influence public discourse. How that? Firstly, as I said, they can always restate whatever they have restated without getting any direct engagement. Secondly, they can sabotage other sites by just posting some random rants in other forums and on other pages, maybe hacking pages and posting some kind of things, and then creating the problem that actually these sites are being taken down because this hardcore minority, as I call them, is abusing its power, is getting too much power on the internet. Second point, what is negative and where do we draw the border? Before that closing.
Do you think Germany's banning of anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and neo-Nazism is a good idea?
Well, it depends on where you draw the legal border. Let's say it like this. What we are talking about here is negative stereotypes. We are not talking about things that are standing outside of the law. I think this is a whole different debate. We could easily have a child pornography debate maybe on that thing, but this is not the case we are talking about here. Because what is First Prop doing? What is the Prime Minister doing standing up here? We are talking about negative stereotypes. We've got two problems with this. The first thing is what is actually negative. There is a differentiation between some things that are offending a certain group of people, but still having some claim of truth to it, maybe. There is things that are absolutely true and still offending to some people, and there is just some things that are maybe not offending, but also not true. So where are we to draw these different lines? There is fundamental a fundamental problem in where to set these lines and where to draw these borders, because there is a multitude of ideas going around. There is a multitude of forms, of expressional forms going around, as for instance satire, as for instance engagement with negative content, that you are limiting here. So what you are doing in the end is pretty much you are limiting the discourse on ideas that can be created through this engagement with what is really negative and what is really a stereotype. And just briefly, where does this lead to? This does lead to who is actually the one to decide on what is really negative. It is very nice that the people can suggest this site is negative to me, but in the end there is always a control board sitting there in the end deciding, okay, this is offensive to me, this is not offensive to me, or this is offensive to some kind of society, this is not offensive to some kind of society. We are saying that if we already have the problem of distinction, what really is negative, then who are we to actually impose on all of society all kinds of views on some matters that are borderline? What have we told you? We have told you that actually Proposition's case won't work because it can be circumvented, it is unclear, and in the end it does only harm without doing good. We beg to oppose. Thank you very much.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for his speech. And to continue the government case, I would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister, Rebecca White. Hear, hear.
Short. Just because it may be hard to catch a racist on the internet, we don't think that means we shouldn't try. We don't think it's all right for the EU to turn its back on hundreds of thousands of people who feel like they're being discriminated and they have no voice to stop it. Because a regular person can't go online and post a comment and have someone take down a site that tells them that you're Jewish, you're greedy, I hate you, you should die. You can't have that taken down as a regular person, and the EU is the body that should protect those people. Now, what we get from opening opposition, or first what I'm going to do for you today is talk about why this is a confirmation bias within the internet, kind of like the echo chamber of where even on fringe sites or on larger sites, you get the buildup and the confirmation that this racism or religious hatred is okay and good, that lots of people like it. And then the next point is why the internet is the amplifier, why we think free speech is good, but why when you create a stage, you in fact can regulate that stage. But before I do so, I have a few points of rebuttal. So first off, we get this idea that we can never actually remove all of these things. Well, I listened to the info slide, maybe they didn't, but the issue here isn't whether or not we can do it, because it's the issue of whether or not people will be affected by it. And we think that that's the core of the debate, and we hate arguments like that. They're silly. Okay, so the next point we get is this idea that first off, and this is a contradiction we get from them, is that first off, there's a small readership for these people, so there's like fringe groups, individuals who are really heated, really racist, who kind of collect, and it's only small amounts. But then he tells us that the Innocence of Muslim video was only viewed by less than 1% of the people who saw it, and people got very upset. Is it one or the other? Are a fringe group of people making an impact on the majority of society, or is it that they're not? We think it's that they are. We think that even if one person sees this video and they tell everyone around them, that it's very likely that someone will send a link, someone will send an email, or they'll perhaps say, look at this website that I saw, and it's really bad. Now, the next point we get is an answer to a POI that Serena asks. And basically, he tells us what we have a response to that, and his response is this idea of like feedback loops, and that you have to have direct impact on this person. You have to tell them what they're doing is wrong. We think, sure, we could probably write them an email saying, yeah, you probably shouldn't be putting racist stuff on your site, but we think it's much more direct if we say, you can't put this on the internet because you aren't allowed. We think that's the most direct way to tell them what they're doing is wrong. We don't think being like, maybe you shouldn't post that because the EU doesn't like it, isn't direct. And that's kind of what they're telling us we should do. Now, the next point we get is basically what is offensive, like what is negative, and he basically harps on our definition. And first off, we think that it's pretty obvious when something is directly racist. I mean, I don't want to use the quote from the Supreme Court Justice, but I know it when I see it. I mean, the issue here is whether or not it clearly attacks a group. And we think that the reason it's okay that the EU and the EU institution we've created can do it is because they are a representation of the goals of the EU. Every single state has opted into the EU with these set goals in mind. Therefore, since those states were elected and whatnot, that they are a representation of those people, a representation of those minority groups, and we think that they have a clear ability to do so. We also think it's relatively easy to know when something is direct. I mean, yes, we think that you should be allowed to question religious doctrine. We don't think you should say that every single person who has that religion is a negative thing, is a bad person. We think that that's kind of obvious. Okay, so what are we talking about in today's debate? What am I adding for you? So the reason that this is so problematic is the internet is an echo chamber. So things look much larger, much more impactful on the internet for two reasons, and it's bad for two reasons. First off, it's very intimidating if you go on a website and it looks like hundreds of thousands of people are looking at this website too, that hundreds of thousands of people agree with a racist perspective, possibly a website that tells you that the Roma are wrong, Romas are all criminals. If you are a Roma and you happen to see that site, you don't know that only 5 people have seen that site. You assume the worst and you think probably everyone in your town has seen that. Probably everyone in your local region has seen that. And it's very scary and doesn't make you feel safe. But go ahead.
Yeah, because when I respond on the internet, I'm so terrified about the possible harm that someone will inflict on me when I say, no, you're wrong. Really, how do they get to me?
Okay, well, I think it's very scary if someone tells you that you aren't a good human if you're Roma. I don't think that I don't think that this one anonymous person is going to attack me, but it's the sentiment of the entire country that I'm Roma. Maybe everyone hates Roma. Maybe I won't have a place to live tomorrow because they're going to kick me out of my house because I'm a Roma and a criminal. We don't think that's good. We don't think you think it's an anonymous person attacking you. We think it's the system. Okay, now the next point that this is exceptionally bad is the confirmation bias. And we think that it's particularly important when we look at countries like France, for example, where they've had like a large immigration population of people who are of like Arab descent or Middle Eastern. And we think when someone thinks like they have something bad happen in their life, possibly maybe their daughter is dating someone who's Middle Eastern, or possibly they lose their job and they happen to see more Middle Eastern people are working at their former place of work. The thing that happens is when you see a bunch of other people saying, well, you know the Arabs, they're taking your jobs. You know the Arabs, they're greedy and bad and will hurt your family and rape your wife and rape your daughter. We think when you see lots of people saying that, it internalizes the fact that that person did something wrong to me. Therefore, all of the people that resemble that person or fit that category of person are also bad. We think that this confirmation bias is exceptionally problematic on the internet because you don't have someone directly telling you. It's not like a friend is telling me that this is true. It's someone who has an authority because they were able to make an internet site. It's someone who has an authority because they can manipulate the facts. There's someone who can make a video, can say say facts that aren't true, like possibly the New York Times agrees with this assertion. We think that those types of things make people believe and buy into that type of racism because we not only think that it creates racism, but it also entrenches racism to the point where you think everyone else possibly agrees with you. And to finish off with my last bit of extension, the difference between free speech and what the internet provides is the government has basically allowed you to have a stage, a public stage that is the internet. We think it's problematic if the government tells you you can't speak about anywhere in society. But when they've created a platform for you to speak, that speech place, that platform can be regulated. And we hear no argumentation against this because we think that the relationship that this debate has to have to free speech is not only how it impacts people of these minority groups and how it impacts the values and cohesion within the EU, but also who has the power to control these things, who has the power to control what we say. And we think in the instance of the internet, not only because it is so condemning to these types of these racial slurs because it amplifies them so much, but also because it was created by this group, created and supported by the EU, that you have to vote for opening government. Thank you.
And now to conclude the first half of this debate, the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Leo Kaufmann.
Sorry. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about three ideas. First, I want to challenge a lot of the premises and of where they came from and where the debate, I think, really sits. Secondly, I want to talk about the balance of ideas and the freedoms of free speech and why that's important in the marketplace of ideas. And thirdly, I want to talk about how ideas form and why we think that the best way isn't to shun, isn't to ban, but rather to engage. And so what we want to start with is this premise that I don't necessarily agree with lots of the hate speech out there, or any of hate speech. I don't need to, right? That's not what the debate is about. The debate is about whether freedom to express oneself should be banned or should be prevented, and at what point. Now, we say that there's a very clear line of when it should be banned. And that is an issue where I incite to cause harm to others. That's the point, not before. When I can show that I'm directly doing a harm to others, fine, we say, you've broken the law, we arrest you anyway. The question is, why do I prevent someone from presenting an idea? So here's some premises that they said. One, the idea that someone on the internet is harmless, is powerless against these information presented to them, as if they can't engage back, as if they can't respond, as if that response doesn't matter, as if they agree that this anonymous person won't come at me, and yet my response to engage with them and to correct them doesn't actually have an impact back on that page. If they want to concede that opinions can change via the messages presented on the internet, then they have to concede that the same engagements with those ideas, that the same rebuttal to those ideas and showing why those ideas are false equally changes those ideas, including of the bigots that they want to change. That doesn't hold both ways. Right. The second thing is this idea, right, of this, that this is somehow a state-approved message just because someone says it, right? Just because I cheat on my wife doesn't mean the state approved on it, right? Just because the state didn't ban it, didn't make it illegal, doesn't mean the state approved it. Not everything that is done in the private field means that the state automatically gives an approval for it. But we don't think that this is anything to do with state approval just because they say we can't intervene until you've actually shown that there's a direct harm on this regard. I'll take it quickly.
Okay. Your partner ran away from the question, so I'll ask you.
Yeah.
Germany took a hardline stance against anti-Semitism.
He didn't run away, and I'll answer it now. Right. The point is this. When there's an incitement to harm, when they say that we should kill the Jews, we think, yes, you should ban it outright, yes. When they say we don't like the Jews, yeah, we shouldn't ban it. We should engage with them and tell them why they're wrong. Because they're not actually telling us why they're telling us an opinion. Now, here's the problem, right? And this comes down to this second idea that we want to talk about, this balance of ideas. Because the idea is here that freedom of ideas, even the freedom to be a bigot, is still a freedom to believe whatever you want to believe. It is actually indistinguishable from freedom of religion. The actual idea that I can believe what I want to believe, hold whatever truths I hold dear, is exactly the same freedoms that they're now claiming we shouldn't allow. Because specifically, right, the Bible tells us that gays are wrong. Because the Quran tells us that infidels should die. Not all Muslims believe that, but that doesn't mean it's not written there. It doesn't mean it's not in the scriptures. It doesn't mean that the ideas don't come. When we had the problems of bullying in the US, and there were countersuits about whether or not we should protect the bullies under the freedom of religion, whether the bullies had the right to bully, physically abuse others because they believed that being gay was wrong. Now we take a stand. We say if you are harming someone, that's wrong. But we say even if you're a bigot, even if we don't like you picketing at a funeral like the Church wants to picket at funerals, we disagree with them. We don't like them. But we can't stop them being bigoted by just banning them, by putting them out of sight and mind. We have to engage with them with the media. If the BNP in the UK presents this racist ideology, shunning them, moving them into the back to an underground, perpetuating, saying disgruntledly to their own members, we're not being engaged with, they're not taking us seriously, this isn't really working because our best ideas aren't being heard, that's not going to help destroy their arguments. Posting the arguments on and saying, here's an engagement with you, this is why you are wrong, that's how you will change them, that's how you belittle them. You do it by social pressure, ganging up and saying, that idea is stupid, therefore we shouldn't believe it, and you should feel that pressure. And the internet is the one thing, if not the rest of the world, ganging up and telling you that that idea is stupid, because it is the rest of the world on there too. Okay, you don't just get the bigots, you get everyone else responding. Okay, that's what freedom of speech is, and that's how we engage with them, and that's how we show them they're wrong. Go. I don't have the right to do whatever I want on the internet. I don't have the right to put child pornography on the internet. I don't have the right to harm people or show snuff movies on the internet. I do have the right to express my opinions on the internet, because that's a free space. Right. Here's the final point I want to talk to you about. How do ideas change? Now, they come from this premise that ideas come from the internet, that if somehow I posted this message on the internet, therefore it's there, I found it, it changed my opinion, my life's gone forever. If that's true, then an equal post of why that's wrong should have the equal transformation of why that's wrong. Actually, we don't think either of them are actually true. What we think is that most of the bigoted ideas are taught in a private home, are taught in a closed environment, are taught in an isolated environment, are taught for you from birth when you're not actually capable of questioning them. And when you go out of the world and you start engaging on the internet and you look for affirming messages, things to confirm your biases, and you look for those messages, you don't only find the things that confirm them, you find the responses to them. Because I have the right to do that. Because those are what people are posting. What they're saying is, right, so what we have here is a situation where this engagement with people, with these ideas, actually works, because when I'm looking for one thing, I find the alternative responses. If I'm engaged in a religious debate, I find both the pros and the cons on there when I look for either side of the debate. And those engagements are the things that matter. Ladies and gentlemen, because they're actually against the idea of freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and freedom of expression, and not actually going to solve the problem, we beg you to oppose. Thank you.
To open the second half of this debate, I would like to invite the Member of Government, Mariel Golden.
The reason that we have very large institutions is to set the standards that will create the changes we want to see in the societies. This is why we have bodies like the UN, the EU, that make the standards that ultimately create the reality and the world that we want to live in. What Drew and I are going to tell you and to bring to you in the extension of this debate is why the EU specifically, this coincides with the goals of the EU, and how by setting these standards you actually decrease the amount of this type of speech in the long term. And ultimately, in the end of my speech, I'm going to describe to you the world in which this type of speech does exist and the world in which this speech doesn't exist, and why that's a better world and why we need to ban these things. Before I get into that, I want to respond to the arguments I heard coming specifically out of the last speaker. So he gets up here and he says, all we have to prove to you is this kind of speech causes harm to others in order to ban them. So when my partner brings up in a POI that in Germany they banned Nazi hate speech and speech, when people can say the Holocaust exists, the reason that they banned that was because speech like that does harm people. Because when people can read that the Holocaust didn't happen, they ultimately internalize that, and that's not right to the many people who suffered in the Holocaust, and that happened. Or when someone says Islamists are terrorists on the internet, and people can see that and hear that, there are people who then believe that and look for that, and that causes a lot of, ultimately perpetuates violence to these groups, and they don't feel accepted in the places that they live, their home, the EU. And if that is the reality for these minority groups, because of this speech, you have to agree it's causing them harm, and you have to ban it by their own principle.
Yeah, on that.
No. Secondly, he says, the only way to defeat this speech is to challenge it directly within a debate. But the problem with this type of speech is the fact that it's not based on logical assumptions, because not all Islamists are terrorists, not all Jews are bad. The fact of the matter is it's based on an emotional appeal, and the only way to actually deal with an emotional appeal is to ban it, because there's no logical way that these people are going to change their mind in the type of debate that he's actually trying to have.
On that.
No. Thirdly, he says, you have the right to hold an opinion, and that this is an absolute right. No, we draw the line at certain points. We draw the line when my opinion actively harms someone else's ability to not have fear within their own society, to not feel accepted within that society. My right to speak my mind has a point at which it harms other individuals, and that's what we stand for. Yeah, and those are the types of standards we want to support. Yeah.
Yeah, that point, the question is, how does me saying I don't like someone mean you should go kill them? How do you make that link?
Because ultimately, which I'm going to get to later in my speech, when people actively search out for these types of speech, it's because they're looking for an excuse to support why problems are happening in their life. And so when they find a reason to blame another group, then they act out violently against that group. When they find rhetoric that supports that, it reinforces, it legitimizes that they can be violent because it's supporting the idea that it's true. No. So now, getting on into what Drew and I are going to talk to you about, let's talk about the EU, because we think the EU has specific things that it wants to reinforce as its goals. We think things like unity, things like tolerance, things like equality. freedoms like feeling that you don't have to live in fear when you live inside the EU. These are all things that the EU has to have set standards for. And when someone sets a standard, it means that people try to live up to those standards. So for example, when the UN sets standards like Millennium Goals or things like that, the reason they set those standards is because once you set a standard like that, people actively try to achieve them. And when you actually have a law, you create institutions that actually make those laws, the idea of those laws, realities. So when a government sets up a law to provide education for its citizens or to have an extra good thing for its citizens, it sets up the institutions that allow those things to happen in reality. So when a government or in the EU does this, it's going to try to make this possible by providing things like education and simply by banning this type of speech from existing.
No, madam.
No. So now going on into the world that we see, I'm going to talk to you now about the world in which this type of speech does in fact exist and why it's a world you wouldn't want to live in. Because the world today, in fact, is not a perfect world. There's many bad things that happen in the world, and there's many hard times that people experience. It is at these times in which people seek out these types of rhetorics and these types of speech to blame someone for the problems that they are experiencing. Sure. It is this rhetoric that was used to unfortunately promote things like the Holocaust. These atrocious things were promoted by ideas of blaming another group. And when you allow those things to exist on the internet before crises happen, before the bad things happen that make people look for these types of things, you allow a breeding ground for people to act violently, to actually internalize stereotypes against minority groups and to blame them in the future. That is the world you set up when you allow these types of speech to exist on the internet.
And that?
No, thank you. So, moreover, how does this harm specifically like the actual individuals we feel that are living in society? So if I'm a Jew, which I am, and I'm reading something on the internet about how Jews are like bad or something like that, it means that the society I'm living in isn't actually protecting me against someone actively hating against an identity that I don't actually have a control over. And societies have a right to protect their citizens and an obligation to protect their citizens. And when I live in a society in which that's not the case, it's not fair to those minority groups, and it doesn't outweigh the right of those individuals when I am actively being harmed. But let's talk about the world in which this type of speech doesn't exist. When I can't go out and try to find on the internet a racist joke to like hurt another person. Because when this doesn't exist, when you don't have it so accessible to people, it makes it really difficult to actually find the type of rhetoric that people use to harm individuals. So the only way to actually diminish the potential of people to use this type of speech in public and to actually use it in ways that will hurt in acts of violence is to actually eliminate it so people don't have access to the future. If you don't eliminate that access, anyone has the ability to come find this speech and use it in poor ways. So for all these reasons, we proudly propose this motion.
I thank the member of government for her fine speech, and to open the case for the closing opposition, I would like to invite Jamie Batchelor to present their case. Hear, hear.
Tall person friendly. Wait. God, they don't think about the tall ones, do they? So apparently my British accent sometimes puts people off because it's so sexy. I could talk in an American accent, but then you might think I'm on proposition. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to talk to you about today is why we think that discourse is incredibly valuable, why I think that encouraging discourse is something that the state should do, why I think that when people talk about controversial issues, you're much more likely to get progress, you're much more likely to get people thinking about these issues, you're much more likely for rational individuals to come to the conclusion which is the right one, to come to the conclusion which is the conclusion that normal, rational individuals will come to. I've got 3 points I'm going to talk about. First, I'm going to talk about this idea of freedom of speech, why it exists, why it needs to be a significant harm in order for a government to justify limiting it. I'm then going to talk about 2 other ideas. Firstly, what controversial things do in society. Secondly, let's talk about what silencing narratives does, and like the various harms of doing that, and why actually the narrative doesn't just go away, as these guys would have you believe. So the first thing, right, I need to do is talk a little bit of rebuttal. Firstly, there's one idea that's still standing from first half. So that because governments created the platform, they're illegitimate in kind of like limiting it. What we say is actually, at the point that the government was in a position where it could allow the internet to happen, it was morally obliged to do that. We don't think the government is being particularly friendly in allowing people to express their views. The technology was there. It would have been illegitimate in stopping it. So in terms of dealing with some of the stuff that, that we've heard from the extension, so firstly, we get this idea that like, that you're never going to be able to change the opinions of the people who are positing them. What we're saying is that that's not what you guys are talking about, right? You guys are talking about the people who get offended by it. You guys are people perhaps talking about the people who agree with it, right? So that in any case, even silencing these people, you're not going to make them no longer think the things that they think. If anything, you're going to make them think them even more strongly. The next point, okay? This idea of like setting standards. In my speech I'm going to show you actually why doing this is a negative thing. And by saying that you're setting standards for other groups of individuals, given that this is a negative idea, you're simply making the harms of your proposition worse. Next idea, suppression will just make it go away. We don't think that the world that she talks about is actually achievable. We think that suppression doesn't get rid of narratives. Suppression actually accentuates them. The next thing is this idea of like this person sees the narratives that are harmful to it and gets upset by it because it assumes that everyone agrees with it. This is something that first half said as well, no thank you. What we actually say on our side of the house is that when you see those things, when you're offended by those things, you're much more likely to look for counter-narratives. You're much more likely to look for people who say, actually, I disagree with these things. Actually, I think that you're particularly wrong. So that these are the kind of things that will be comforting. We also think that these are the kind of things that the majority of people will say. I think that a majority of people probably think that somebody saying Jews are stupid is something that should be opposed. It's something that's pretty bad. So the next thing, so this first thing briefly on freedom of speech, right? So it's incredibly important because it allows people to express themselves, allows people to voice the opinions. So in a world in which freedom of speech isn't given to its fullest extent without a significant degree of harm, we say that like you don't allow these people to express opinions, you don't have any incentive for those people to form opinions or to form rationales, right? We say that it's incredibly important for people to have opinions and to have thoughts in order for like progress in society to happen, right? That's just the brief idea of why you guys need to show us a significant harm which you haven't done, no thank you. So let's get into these 2 big points, right? First, I think controversy. I think controversy is incredibly important, right? It's incredibly important to have controversial narratives because a huge amount of society see kind of like moderately bad ideas and they don't engage with them, right? Because they're not shocked into engagement. They don't really want to. They don't really want to think about it. They think it's maybe a little bit boring. What he says is that when you see something that is particularly offensive and particularly extreme, what you say is actually that's the kind of thing that will engage people. That's the kind of thing that people will see and not be able to ignore. That's the kind of thing that people will actually look at and criticize, right? What this does is 2 things. Firstly, in terms of the people positing these narratives, in terms of the people saying why they have these opinions, saying that they have these opinions. They need to be able to justify it in the face of criticism. They need to be able to have a rationale. So that being challenged creates a kind of like much more deep basis for the person having those ideas, which is much easier to criticize, which is the second idea, right? Because it forces the broader population, in terms of the fact that they're seeing these ideas, forces the broader population to consider their genuine opinion on the idea. It forces the broader population to consider why they disagree with it. I think that's an inherently good thing. I'm going to tell you why after this quick POI. Because we don't think that the things that happen afterwards, we don't think that the broader discussion in like by the people who are seeing it is something that's bad, right? We don't think that it's necessarily anonymous or like an individual either. So that when people see these things, which is the thing that we're saying on opposition, when the broader population experience these things, because the controversy has pushed it into the public sphere, because it's so popular or whatever, no thank you. So that's the kind of time when actually you have these benefits I'm talking about. So And yeah, we think that basically you get a much higher level of critical analysis throughout society. There are like broad social harms to this as well, based around ideas of like criticizing the things that happen to you, probably good on the basis that like you think that maybe my government shouldn't do this bad thing, maybe that individual shouldn't do this bad thing. Having like high levels of critical analysis throughout society is like an incredibly positive thing. I think that when these guys say that they're going to silence these narratives, what they do is they make it much more difficult. No, thank you, for people to engage with the actual narrative, which is my final point, right? What silencing actually does. We don't buy the idea that they tell you that when you say you're not allowed to see that website anymore, that the people who run the website, the people that have the opinions, will say, oh well, I can't be read anymore, I might as well stop having my opinions, or I might as well stop trying to voice my opinions. Or he says that you massively incentivize them, because they see that they're not allowed these opinions anymore. They see that the state doesn't want them to have these opinions. The state is trying to suppress those opinions and squash those opinions. They feel victimized, and they feel that they need to act against it. That you incentivize these people to go to extreme measures to try to get their voices heard, because they feel like their freedoms and their rights are being restricted by a state that doesn't want them to be heard. Second thing that happens is particularly punishes, no thank you, is what happens to those people in broader society, right? Because what you do is you create this idea of mystery, right? You create the idea that, oh, well, there was that website called like jewsabad.com, but now I'm not allowed to see it. No, obviously jewsabad.com is pretty obvious what it's about, but you know what I mean? So like there's this website which I'm no longer allowed to see because it's banned, right? I think that doesn't make someone go, oh well, that's all right. We say that when you see that these pictures of like Kate Middleton were like banned broadly and they tried to stop it, what you have is a lot of people going, I wonder what the pictures were. I wonder why they were so bad. I wonder why they were banned, right? You create a mystery around narratives. You create incentive for people to actually find out what these things are, even though they have been banned. And if they can't find out what these things are, they tend to assume what they are. This is incredibly harmful because it stops any level of engagement with the actual narratives. You just have engagement with things that people think of. We don't think this is the kind of thing that you want. Furthermore, you allow the people an extra force to the narrative that they're having, right? They allow the people to have this kind of, we are victimized, the government doesn't want to hear what we have to say. So this actually makes these negative narratives that we want people to see, engage with, and realize are bad, it actually makes these kinds of narratives and these kinds of groups of people sound like they're people who are victims, right? They're victims of the government, they're victims of censorship, and therefore, for some reason, their ideas are more plausible. Why? Because, like, yeah, they've been victimized by the government, and, like, their narratives aren't wanted, right? So they have this kind of, the government hates us, the government isn't letting us say these things. I think that for all these reasons, actually, this kind of suppression is incredibly harmful, and we are incredibly proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for his speech. And now to conclude the case for the government side, I would like to welcome Government Whip Drew, and I'm not even going to try that, Adam Chick.
How's that? Good? Yeah, there we go. So I'd like to start by first thanking the OrgCom and everyone who's been involved with this tournament. We've had a wonderful time here in Budapest. I'd also like to thank everyone involved in this final. It's really been a tremendous experience. So thank you, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a Jewish American. And the fact of the matter is, when I wear a Star of David around my neck and people see that, they associate a whole number of things with my identity. They associate things that are not things I have done, but things that are evil, things that are believed. And I know that when I walk down the street and people see that, they associate these things with me and they associate them with problems in my identity. That is not something that should be allowed in our society. That is not something that should be tolerated. I should be viewed based on my own identity and based on my own actions, not based on views that are false, not based on views that advocate evil actions. We believe this debate today has come down to two fundamental things. First of all, we're going to talk about why the EU specifically should be the ones to pursue this policy, what their obligations are as regards this kind of action. And second, I'll talk about why this policy does actually work to prevent these kinds of things happening, how we get a better society coming out of that. Before I do that, I just have a couple points of rebuttal I want to deal with. First of all, we have this notion coming up and down the opposition bench that discourse and engagement is good, that's the way we deal with it. We have a couple responses that we've told you this, that they just have simply ignored. First of all, we tell you that like these kinds of stereotypes are not based on logical appeal. appeals, right? Like Mein Kampf wasn't based on logic. Mein Kampf was based on telling people, like emotional appeals of saying, these people are the problems, these people are the issues. Engaging with them and just saying, you're wrong is not the issue. Like people are already telling these people that they're wrong, but people are looking for an excuse to see these things. Additionally, they're ignoring the fact that we're talking about the internet specifically. It's not like the BNP where like I can just stand for office and you defeat me in the election. No, like there's no incentive for me if I'm the racist person maintaining this website to get rid of my website. You can tell me I'm wrong and I can be like, whatever, screw you, the website's still there. The website continues to exist, and even if you want to engage with it, people can still see that website, can still see these harms.
Yeah.
No thank you. Second of all, he tells us the narrative still exists even if we get rid of it. Yes, regrettably, there is going to be a narrative of racism that occurs in society. We think that we can take a strong stance discouraging them, because when these things do exist in society, the narrative is that these are normalized parts of society, like, oh, those are just the racists, those are just the things, like, those are just those people, like, talking about the Arabs again. We need to take a strong stance and say, no, it's not you just holding your opinion. What you are doing is evil. What you are doing is wrong. Because this side of the house says people are upset. No, people are seeing a fundamental assault on their identity, and governments ought to take a strong stance, and bodies like the EU ought to take a strong stance against that. Third, they have this notion that these are just people's opinions. It's fine. It's not that big of a deal. You know what? These opinions are harmful, and these opinions are illegitimate. They admit that there is a threshold at which we can say some opinions are not legitimate for you to hold. They're like, well, your religion is something that's fine. You know what? If your religion tells you that it's not okay for certain people to love in the way that they want, I'm going to say that's not an opinion you're legitimate in holding. That is evil and that is wrong, and we're proud to take a stance on that as well. That's not what we're talking about the debate today. We don't think just saying we allow it in religion too is a necessary justification of why these things are harmful. We think people's lives are harmed in concrete ways when these attacks happen. No thank you. Finally, they tell us, we talk about the idea of people stopping and people feeling like these people are going to feel victimized. They're not going to stop. What we tell you is, first of all, like it's going to be incredibly more difficult for them to get their message out. The internet is a very easy way for them to do these things. We think many of the people who resort to these things are fundamentally cowards. That if you get rid of their access to be able to promote these things and say, now the way you have to get on your racist views is you have to go stand on the street corner and become one of those crazy people saying the Arabs are the fault. These people might say, you know what, it's not worth it, and they're just going to continue to stew in their own racism and their own like views against these individuals. We think that like even if they're going to feel more victimized, fine. They should feel victimized because what they're doing is wrong, what they're doing is evil. We think a lot of these people are not going to be able to continue doing the things they're going to do. They're going to stop in them.
Okay, but
sure.
Okay, but then you must acknowledge the mass comments that you get in response to this. Both create an air of shaming, which changes not on a logical basis, but on a social pressure point, and at the same time encourage the community that there's a mass amount of people showing their protection and support against those ideas that are already there.
Thank you. Okay.
So that's a positive outcome.
That would be wonderful, but if anyone who's ever like run any sort of blog website knows, you can just delete the comments you don't agree with. So if I say if I get on a website and I'm like, hey, I'm like advocating that Jews are the problem, and you're like, actually, Jews probably aren't all evil. You can just go, bink, and that comment's gone. You don't have to deal with it. No, that's how the internet works. Like, go online. Okay, no. Why should the EU specifically be the one to be engaged in this thing? This is what we told you a lot about on Second Government. We tell you that the EU works to provide equality and a broad framework for unity, the kind of society they want to be in. That's why the EU has things like standards for human rights before you can join the EU, because the EU wants to promote a better society for all of the members within that society. And the EU ought to take the high road, ought to take the standards of saying, this is the society we want to see, this is the Europe we want to see, because when there is more unity within those countries, there's less chance of like violence breaking out, there's less chance of harms breaking out, because people feel like they're part of a broader community that tolerates them. This is what the EU stands for, this is their goal and obligation. When the EU enforces this policy specifically, they're aligning their goals and views with actual practices that will mean that there are less instances of these stereotypes occurring, there are less instances of the violence against these people occurring. When the EU is promoting a better world in this way, we tell you that this is the reason why the EU was created, this is what the EU should stand for, and they should be the ones to be pursuing this policy. That's why we think the EU ought to have this obligation. But how does this policy specifically work? Because they tell us on this side of the house, it's just not going to work. When I mention in a POI the example of Germany, and they say like, oh, well, maybe that didn't work. The fact of the matter is, when Germany takes a hard line and says, this is not tolerated, if you want to be anti-Semitic, that is not your opinion, you are wrong, you are evil, then there is less people who are spreading those views because they like physically are incapable of doing them. And that the other people in the society say, like coming from the top down, these are the new standards that are coming out. When these top-down standards come out, we see less of these instances occurring because one, it's more difficult to spread these things, and two, if you're looking for confirmation that that these stereotypes do exist, you can't find that confirmation within these things, which means that you're not going to be able to do these things. What we tell you is that individuals feel assaulted. And it's not that they're upset, they feel an assault on their identity. They feel fundamental, and they're denied things. They're denied things like jobs. There's violence against these individuals. And then when people turn on hard times, there's issues, they're the first people they blame. Because even if you're a logical, rational person, you see these stereotypes and you're like, okay, right now I don't think they're true. Over time, they're ingrained in your mind. They're sitting there like some sort of virus. And then they're waiting to come out. And then when you have a problem in your life, or when you're looking for someone to blame, that's when you turn on those stereotypes. That's when you look for these things to happen. When you eliminate them, when you make them no longer accessible, you prevent them from sitting in these people's minds, you prevent them from being there. And there's a particularly effective way that you can do this, because limiting this diminishes the power of these individuals to promote views that make individuals feel like there's a fundamental assault on their lives. They're not able to live in the societies they want to live in, which I think is an absolute right of them when they're living in the European Union. So for these two reasons, that the EU specifically ought to be the one to do these policies, because it's in alignment with the goals and obligations that they have as like a superstructure overseeing European states. And second of all, this policy specifically works to make individuals no longer feel like there's a fundamental assault on their identity, no longer suffer like incidences like violence or discrimination, and that because doing this successfully marginalizes these people who hold these views, I think this is a good idea. In the back of this hall, there is a statue of Karl Marx, and if we can learn anything from him, is that ideas have power. And when the ideas like stereotypes exist, ideas exist that say that certain people, from no fault of their own, are causing problems in their society. Those ideas can sit in a society, and those ideas can erupt into harms. We think eliminating these ideas, taking them out of the discourse, is the best possible way to make sure that we have a more harmonious society. I am incredibly proud to propose.
And now, to conclude this debate for the opposition and all of us in this room, here comes the opposition whip, Stephen Gaywood.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to talk about two issues here. One of them which was untouched, which we brought you, why criticism is so important, why this policy is so damaging to freedom. They completely ignored this. The other issue is the idea of engagement versus suppression, whether the suppression they plan will actually help, whether it will make people not hold these views, the harms the suppression will have, and the benefits of engagement, and how it's the only way to solve the problem. Okay, firstly, right. We have the idea of cultural stereotypes, right? Ethnic stereotypes, religious stereotypes. Like, what is that exactly? Does that mean you can't criticize a religion? No, not technically. But, like, not everyone on the internet is a debater. Not everyone will be able to phrase these things perfectly. Like, things will come off that are offensive, but these criticisms need to be heard. It's really, really important, even if they're not phrased in the best way, even if they offend people, especially if other people then say, right, this is not quite true, like actually engage with the issues. But they're really important because your cultural background, your religious, no thank you ma'am, your religious views and so on shape a great deal about your life. They shape like your ethics, they shape your worldview, they shape your ambitions, so on and so forth. This was unengaged with, like, people have this right to be informed about this. If you suppress the criticism, right, by this ban, the result of that, yeah, I'll take your point. Like, ma'am, you've conceded from your own side of the house that, like, no one actually who does not deliberately go and look for these websites is remotely convinced by them, because there is this huge backlash, because reasonable human beings seeing something, no thank you, seeing something quite ridiculous will actually go and check. Like, you have not shown how the existence of these websites actually, like, makes people racist. That's unconvincing. Right, okay, right. As I back on this point, right, people have the right to be informed about criticisms. Even if the criticisms are ill-phrased, even if the criticisms are offensive, they need to know. Like, it changes so much about how they're going to live their life. It is their fundamental right. It's not that people do have a right to say these, but it's that people have a right to hear it if they so wish. You cannot take this right away from people. No, thank you. Right. Now, like, the main clash of this debate, because this was basically uncontested by Prop, is engagement versus suppression. Like, the massive, massive harms of suppressing it, how it doesn't actually change what's going on, and the benefits of actually engaging with these issues as we should. Right. The first thing is that Prop consistently has said that by taking down these websites, by pretty horrible people saying nasty racist things, that's going to make them not nasty racist people anymore. And like before, the websites are converting people, which we've just shown is like nonsense, because people can engage with it, people can discuss this. Right? No, thank you, ma'am. Like, people can discuss this, okay? Right. Yeah, people, not only are they going to retain these views, but they're going to spread them by other means. They're going to speak, like, socially to people and actually spread these views like this. Now, this is more problematic. If you're talking one-on-one with someone, you don't have you think that this maybe represents a legitimate opinion. Whereas if you see something online and it gets immediately slammed by 400 people, well, then you probably know that the public consensus is that these things are not acceptable, right? Okay. The other thing is, which was not engaged with, no thank you, which was not engaged with, again, at any point by Prop Bench, is the narrative you create by banning something, by banning information from people, because people are curious, people want to know. You create an air of mystery, people know that these things have been banned, right? It also allows the people who are professing these views to say, the state, or even better for them, the group in question, like, there's a conspiracy, they're already in charge, they're already in the state, they're suppressing us, we must fight back, we are the resistance. It creates this narrative, it makes it more plausible, it actively damages it, it actually spreads racism and so on by allowing by suppressing these websites, right? Okay, I'll take your point.
The problem that we see on your side of the case is you refuse to engage with the fact that this is the internet. It's not a discussion between debaters, it's not a social interaction, it is not even face-to-face as we brought in our speech.
Right, like, the point of the internet, which I've been saying, like, is that there are lots of people on it. I don't think, it's like, there are lots of people who are relatively well informed. There are lots of people, like, I'd say the majority of people say that these things are not okay, right? Condemnation from large groups of people is far more effective than sort of, like, not being sure, but only having one other person in front of you, right? I think this is quite obvious. No thank you, right? Yeah. The other thing is that where you completely hide the issue. You don't know how prevalent it is by suppressing it. You don't know how, you don't know that these people have these views. There are plenty of people who will quite happily go through lots of their lives thinking that, like, racism was an issue of the past, that it's not a thing anymore, right? By allowing these websites to exist, by have people criticizing them, by having, for instance, the uproar, thank you, Prop Bench, when, like, The Innocence of Muslims was published, by this uproar, like, people realize that people are still saying these things. The issues are brought to light. People care. Like, it brings the issues in. Now, right, this is why suppression is so harmful. No, thank you, ma'am. What are the benefits of engagement? Like, we hold on this side of the House that it is absolutely vital for a dialectic to take place. Like, for even the most nasty, horrid views must be heard, right? Because we can condemn them. Because then we can, like, engage with these people and they can actually think, right, widespread condemnation. If they're completely nuts, maybe they'll ignore it, but they're not going to change their minds by having their views taken down from the internet. But if they're not, they'll think, okay, well, everyone hates this opinion. Maybe I should do some research? Like, it's quite a rational thing to do if everyone hates your view, to check if it's actually grounded in reality. It alerts people, furthermore, right, engagement, like the existence of these issues, alerts people to the problems around them. It forces people to confront it, forces people to, like, confront their views, and it brings the issue into the public sphere. The final thing I want to deal with here, the final benefit of engagement, is the backlash. Like, Prop brought us something about, like, how nasty it is when like, for some reason, a minority group trawls the internet for a site that explicitly condemns them, or they see a post that attacks their group. What we'll see is a massive backlash against them, and we think that's intensely comforting, right? And because, like, criticism is so important, because criticism is vital, again, I'd like to remind you this issue was not engaged with at all, and because suppression has so many harms, and that engagement is the only way, we beg to oppose.
I thank the speaker and indeed all debaters for a fabulous grand final and would like to invite you to give them another round of applause.